Weighing it all in the balance, I conclude that the evidence that I have read, I have seen, I have heard, would have led me, if I'd had the opportunity, irresistibly to make a proposition of refusing this application. We're being asked to take on far too much on trust in what I believe we all agree around the table here and probably within the audience as well, is a novel process where regulation, thorough regulation, may have to catch up with exploration. And I'm afraid that's no way to go ahead. I believe it was up to Third Energy to prove their case. And I'm sad to say that I think you've fallen well short of the mark in doing so. I've heard what the Chief Operating Manager, John Dewar, I believe his name was, said about 20 years' experience of producing gas in Rydell without problems. But none of those 20 years has involved fracking and all that it entails. And we have had plenty, we've heard plenty about this in these last 2 days. So yes, 20 years of uneventful extraction of gas, but never once have you dipped your toe into the fracking pot. And that's the concern. That's the difference one word has made. I must say, and this is my observations, I found the content of the Planning Officer's report a little disappointing. It appears that its conclusions rely far too heavily on the applicant's evidence, more so than I've seen in my 20-year career of being on 2 planning committees up in the Dales National Park and at Richmondshire, and having considered and decided, I would suggest, about 3,500 planning applications. We've heard of 150 HGVs moving backwards and forwards, probably in the course of a couple of days. We've seen what will be, in my view, akin to Southampton docks built in that wonderful slice of countryside when they pile up the shipping containers. I don't find that a slightly a neutral impact. I find it highly damaging. You do wonder how many of those who have written those recommendations live within 75 miles of the site, let alone 750 yards. We have heard from a number of experts supporting refusal, some brought in by Frack Free Rydell and other campaign groups, some simply local residents in Rydell. I've got to say, it seems to me that there's a very large number of professors and medical practitioners of note living in the district of Rydell. We haven't quite so many in Richmondshire, I'd have to say. But they hold opinions, and their opinions are worthy of being listened to, and I'm not sure that we have. They, to me, speak with distinguished authority about the great uncertainty around fracking, and based on the precautionary principle that must guide our action, they say this application should be refused. The report relies on the applicant's evidence and their consultants and the statutory consultees, and dealing with the objections that turn to one side with the consolation remarks that those objections are either reasonable or understandable. That's all they get. I think they're worth a lot more than that, and I'm not sure they've been given the weight that they should have been in the report. Frankly, I have to say, I expected greater scrutiny, greater challenge from this, the County Planning Authority. We've been too easily satisfied here as a county planning authority, far too easily satisfied, and we haven't gone the extra mile in making the challenge to make sure what we're being told stacks up, and I don't think that it does. I'm a passionate independent councillor. I am charged with seeking to promote the social, the economic, and environmental best interest of the local community. In our terms, they call it the power of competence. Fracking on this site will go on not like foot and mouth for 1 year, for up to 9 years, and don't be under any false impressions. It can be extended and extended and extended. You could have fracking forever here in Rydale. What I didn't find, when I hoped to find, that there's no reference to the extra employment that will be created by the approving of this planning application to make up for the loss of the employment in the tourism and agricultural industry when news goes viral on Facebook and Twitter across the nation that fracking is okay in North Yorkshire. Not a single job. Employment isn't even mentioned in the report. That is a grave omission, and you've heard me just challenge it. And it's an oversight by our planning officer, and I have the highest respect for her. But how can you overlook continued economic prosperity and say that you've done a thorough job on the planning application? I'm not going through all the conflicting viewpoints, but conflicts exist on all of them. Air quality, dust, water contamination, flowback concerns, impact on ecology and wildlife, transport movements, noise. I found that though there was less concerns about the impact on the health of the local community nearest to the site. That seems to be underplayed in the report. Dr. Tim Thornton, a GP of some 32 years standing in Rydale, and others hardly rate a mention in the report. However, we've heard that Holland and New York State, for example, have put a moratorium on fracking mainly because of their health concerns. Surely they're worth something more than they've received in our assessment of the application. What I've found looking in the report, no, in fact, it is a shot in the dark to approve this, and I see no compelling reason why North Yorkshire should be the guinea pig when those impacted by it, directly or indirectly, have so much to lose. I would have liked to have moved refusal. We should be refusing this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, thank you. We don't have applause in this meeting.
First of all, I cannot recall in my 38 years involved in planning any application in which I've been involved which has attracted so much interest. But of course our views on this are not to be decided solely by weight of numbers. It's not, as one of the objectors said, a referendum. As members of the Planning Committee, we all know that in determining planning applications we must adhere to the requirement that the key issues are the development plan and other material considerations. There are many issues of concern to the objectors: noise and landscape impact, ecological and highway issues, contamination issues relating to air quality, impacts on groundwater aquifers, sustainable energy and climate change, proliferation and the potential impact of an unspecified number of websites, the potential effects on the rural economy, particularly tourism and agriculture, and concerns that we should learn from the problems which have occurred and been well documented in, for example, the US and Australia. In my view, the amount of information provided by the applicant and the analysis of the officer's report is inadequate in some respects and leaves me feeling uncomfortable about this proposal. I'll consider some of these issues to illustrate my concerns. That does not imply that I don't accept that the other issues raised are equally relevant. Applying the precautionary principle, I'm not able, with hand on heart, to say the potential risks of this proposal, which have been described as novel by some but not by others, have been addressed to a point where we can grant planning permission. The precautionary principle is one of the key elements for policy decisions concerning environmental protection and management. It is applied in the circumstances where there are reasonable grounds for concern that an activity is or could cause harm, but where there is uncertainty about the probability of the risk and the degree of harm. It is to encourage, perhaps even oblige decision makers to consider the likely harmful effects of their activities on the environment before they pursue those activities. I'm further concerned by the comment of the Environment Agency on page 63 of the report that you may wish to satisfy yourself which of these processes and emissions at this site can be controlled by the permits and which will not. I'm also concerned that we are told in the report that the control regime in this country is somehow superior to that in other countries, so that the impacts of fracking elsewhere, that all are agreed have occurred to a greater or less extent, will not happen here. In particular, we have no clear evidence as to the difference between the untested control regimes in the UK and those in the US and Australia, other than the evidence of Professor Nick Cohen, which suggests that in the US the regulations have been tightened to try to address past issues, and these regulations are now tighter than in the UK. What we do have is first-hand evidence from a former resident of Australia who tells us that despite strong regulations, the control mechanisms have failed. Nobody has contradicted this with clear evidence. The control regime is only as good as the controllers. How far can we be clear that this will be the case? Are our controls gold-plated? As a Selby resident, I'm only too clear about the lack of control that led to the Great Hex stink and the Sherburn tyre fire. As one objector said, they step in after something has gone wrong. The issues at Priest Hall have not been discussed in the officer's report, or indeed in any detail at this meeting. Moving to the policy issues, I reiterate the issue raised by Councillor Holt in relation to Saved Policy 7.6, quoted on page 115 of the agenda. This states that planning permission for commercial production will only be granted within the framework of an overall development scheme relating to all proven deposits within the gas field or oil field. Advice from the Transport, Economy and Environment Board to the Executive in relation to this issue stresses the need to take account of cumulative impacts. This has not occurred. If this goes ahead, how many additional wells do we face? Has anyone any idea what the density and geographic extent will be? In short, has anyone looked at producing an overall development scheme relating to all proven deposits? I don't think so. In relation to potential impacts, many have been highlighted, and I will draw attention to some of those that I do not consider have been adequately covered. Firstly, health issues. Regardless of actual health issues, it's held on appeal that fear about the consequences of the proposed development on the health and well-being of local residents and concern about adverse implications for local businesses is a material consideration. There is no discussion of that in the officer's report. It's quite clear that many residents do have fear in relation to health issues. In relation to fracking fluid, we are told, is non-hazardous. It's probably schoolboy chemistry, but I thought I read it included sulfuric acid, which doesn't always strike me as non-hazardous, I have to say. And secondly, on the 30 to 50% flowback, that is the figure given in the report, but there can't be an accurate prediction, apparently. Potential impacts, particularly on the shallow groundwater. We are assured there will be no accidents or spills, but history tells us that this can't be guaranteed. Even Yorkshire Water have indicated that risks to the aquifer are very low. That's not no risk. We heard that elsewhere the amount of flowback fluid greatly exceeded predictions, and that was not contradicted. We cannot rule that out on this site. Next to the highways and the bridge, the applicant's witness, Mr. Foster, suggested that the 20-mile-per-hour limit could be enforced by condition. By whom? Who's going to ensure that vehicles drive across the centre of the bridge at 5 miles an hour? Who's going to be there to do it? How are they going to do it? Moving to ecology and bats and the conservation of habitats and species regulations. The comment that the site is devoid of bats at 7:49 is misleading and possibly incorrect given the recent survey. Natural England's standing advice is that if there is a reasonable likelihood of protected species being present on the site or affected by the development, surveys must be undertaken. Officers are still maintaining that the proposal is unlikely to give rise to a significant effect on bats. But in the absence of evidence, that's a bold statement. A number of authorities have fallen foul of this legislation and appeared in the High Court as a result. A survey post-planning permission will not address the issue. Economy, agriculture and tourism. There's mixed evidence on those, but no clear conclusion that this key issue can be sorted out, particularly with proliferation. I also have subsidiary concerns about potential noise and landscape impacts. I accept these are relatively short term, and in some respects the mitigation is as bad as the original harm. In summary, I have general concern about the information about regulatory regimes in other countries, where it's been accepted by the applicant speakers that there have been some issues. But my main concern in relation to this application relates to, firstly, the policy issues, particularly policy 7.6 and cumulative impacts. Secondly, health issues and the perception of risk to health. Thirdly, issues of fracking fluid and groundwater. Fourthly, highways issues and the bridge. Fourthly, ecology, bats and the conservation of habitats and species regulations. And lastly, impacts on the economy. I won't be voting with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
We have a proposal, and it is seconded, that we move the recommendation and grant this application. All those in favour, please show.
7, Chairman.
Those against?
4. 4, Chairman.
4 against. So the application is granted.